Romans 2 can be confusing for you if you're new to the Bible or if you're new to reading Romans. And so let me walk you through this in the context of the bigger picture, in the context of Abraham and God's promise to us through Abraham. What he's going to be talking about here is sin. And he's going to be talking about a lot about the law and about God's righteous judgment. So he says here in verse 9, there will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek. So it's like he's flipping the promise on its head almost. He's saying the opposite of the promise, the opposite of the gospel is judgment and tribulation. And he's saying that Jews and Gentiles are all going to be judged the same way. And so there's not like a different way or a different path for Jews as there is for Gentiles. And so really what Paul's doing here is he's setting up the idea of sin, that we all are subject to God's wrath when we sin. Everyone is, right? He says, but there will be glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek, for God shows no partiality. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand what he's saying here. He's not saying that when we do good, that's what justifies us. That's not at all what he's saying. So if you take this verse out of context, you'll get the wrong message for sure. So make sure you read, as we do with all of Scripture, make sure you read the whole passage and let Scripture interpret Scripture. So don't just pull this verse 10 out and say, see, look, God is saying that if you do good, then you'll have glory and honor and peace. You're kind of missing the point. The point is the only people who can really do good, we're going to see at the end of the chapter who those people are. So let's scroll a little bit further. Again, I'll let you read this for yourself. I'm just trying to help you to understand this whole, some sections here so that you can read it for yourself. He says, for when Gentiles who do not have the law, in other words, what that means is Gentiles didn't grow up with the Old Testament law because they're not Jewish. But when they do by nature what the law requires, then they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. In other words, he says, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. So what he's saying is that God doesn't just reveal his immutable law. He doesn't just reveal what's right and wrong only to Jewish people because they have the Ten Commandments. He says that every human being has a basic sense of what's right and wrong. And so that shows that every human being is still accountable to God, not just the Jews who have the law, but every human being is accountable to God because we all have a general sense of what's right and wrong. That's how God wired us. That's how God made us. That's what he's saying there. Now he talks about circumcision. And remember, circumcision was a sign of the covenant that God had given through Abraham way back in Genesis. And so circumcision represents all of the Jewish people. But look at what Paul says here. For circumcision is indeed of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, then your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So that's pretty harsh for any Jewish people who are reading this, saying, well, no, wait a second. I have a sense of pride that I'm a child of Abraham and I'm circumcised. And Paul is saying something really radical here. He says, no, you know what? Circumcision means nothing. It means zero. It's not good. It's not bad. At the end of the day, and we'll see what he's saying here toward the bottom, he says, for no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. So this passage right here, and this is what he's going to be unpacking now in chapter 3, but this passage right here is really important for us to understand. And if you remember back to Galatians, Paul also wrote that. He wrote Galatians before he wrote Romans. When I read Romans, I just see the same thoughts, just developed a little bit more solidly and spoken with much more conviction. And he's a lot more concise when he writes it in Romans, but it's the same exact thing. He talks about law, he talks about spirit, and he talks about the fact that everyone, Jew and Gentile, Everyone can have this Spirit by faith, not by works. So read Romans 2, and then we'll see you tomorrow as we unpack the really important chapter, Romans 3.